I have said for over 10 years since coming to these events that the declared policy of the United States of America should be the overthrow of the mullah's regime in Tehran. The behavior and the objectives of the regime are not going to change, and therefore the only solution is to change the regime itself. And that's why before 2019, we here will celebrate in Tehran. For the first time in at least 8 years that I've been coming to this event, I can say that we have a President of the United States who is completely and totally opposed to the regime in Tehran. The changed circumstances in the United States, I think throughout Europe, and here today are so important. There is a viable opposition to the rule of the Ayatollahs, and that opposition is centered in this room today.
You're looking at videos from social media, protesters doing the unthinkable. They were tearing down a banner with the Supreme Leader Ayatollah Khamenei's photo. These protesters, we were told, are shouting their support for the House of Pahlavi. Prince Reza Pahlavi, the son of the Shah. They're calling for, quote, the King of Iran to return to the country. So, are these growing street protests a tipping point against the Islamic regime in Tehran that could finally lead to its downfall, or will this dissipate like the Green Revolution in 2009? With us, John Bolton, former U.S. Ambassador to the United Nations, Senior Fellow at the American Enterprise Institute, Fox News contributor and chairman of the Gatestone Institute here in New York. So, Ambassador, President Trump has tweeted his support of the protesters. What more, though, can the government do, can he do, to encourage and help the Iranian people?
Well, I think there's a lot more. I think it's important to understand that these demonstrations are very different than the demonstrations that took place in the summer of 2009 after Mahmoud Ahmadinejad stole the presidential election that year with the blessing of the Ayatollahs running the country. Those demonstrations were really led by elements within the government itself, and so they brought people into the streets to protest the election, but they were not by and large protesting the regime itself. Some people were, but not the leaders. And that's why those demonstrations started in Tehran. That's where the center of the government is, and only spread. These demonstrations are very different. We've seen from even the limited press coverage that's out there that these people are calling for the end of the Islamic Revolution itself. And that their economic complaints are not new. These are things that have gone back for a long time. I think it shows the regime is in trouble, and that's why I think the United States could play an important role here, not by use of force or anything like that, but by supporting the legitimate opposition, and frankly by declaring that it's American policy to see the Ayatollahs overthrown.
You know, you talk about the opposition. I interviewed Reza Pahlavi 7 months ago. In May, he called for these street demonstrations. He called for massive civil disobedience. He said the government should be paralyzed and it could fall. Like Nelson Mandela, the fall of the Berlin Wall, the Prague Spring, and the Soviet Union. Here's part of what he said.
Change will occur. Whether we like it or not, it's a historical conclusion that these kind of regimes simply cannot survive. It's just a matter of time. The only question is how soon and at what cost, to be honest with you. We can only help expediting this.
You have no doubt that one day this regime will fall.
Absolutely. There's no question about it.
So how can the government expedite that?
Well, I think it's important to make clear what our objective is. It's not simply to comment on what's happening there. We think the real threat in the region is the regime of the Ayatollah Khamenei and the clerics and the Revolutionary Guard. So it may well be that legitimate opposition elements, whether it's the Crown Prince, the NCRI, MEK, other opposition elements, could benefit from material support from the United States. And I think that's something we need to look at very seriously. I think the most dramatic change has already occurred. You have President Trump, members of his administration, taking the side of the demonstrators, 180 degrees the opposite of what Barack Obama did in 2009. And we know from former Soviet prisoners that when Ronald Reagan spoke out about their dissent from the communist government. It gave them hope. It said the rest of the world was watching. And I think the opposition inside Iran and in the vast Iranian diaspora outside of the country can see that this is a very different American administration.
You just mentioned the opposition coalesce, and is this that prime moment that can continue some of these protests and potentially achieve some type of reform and freedom for Iran?
Well, the opposition is divided. There's no question about it. Those loyal to the Shah don't like speaking to the NCRI, and the feeling is mutual. That's certainly something that the regime will try to exploit. So we don't really know yet whether these demonstrations will continue to take hold, will grow, or whether this is something that will pass and we'll have to see a longer struggle. But I think it would be a mistake to say that the regime is in a strong position. There are all kinds of currents about opposition to the regime, economic discontent with their mismanagement of the economy, not just in the wake of the Iran nuclear deal, as some people are saying, but ever since 1979, there's ethnic discontent. And the young people, you know, nearly two-thirds, maybe more than that of the population are under 30. They know they could lead a very different kind of life than under this theocratic regime that they face. So the opposition is, while it's divided, I think is very extensive. I think it's important for the United States, and I wish our friends in Europe would say the same thing and speak up and say that they support the rights of these people for a truly representative government. It's not going to come from the regime in power now, and that's why I think the U.S. goal has to be to see the regime toppled. I would say before the 40th anniversary of the Islamic Revolution of 1979. So before 2019, we want a representative government in Iran.
There's a potential deadline looming, 2019. Ambassador John Bolton, we've seen the unthinkable happen before. You know, from Moscow and Eastern Europe, maybe it can happen in Tehran. Thank you, as always, and Happy New Year.
Happy New Year.
Of course.